marijuana is by far the least addictive of all psychoactive drugs, less so than alcohol. And the profits that Chief Wozniak is referring to are driven by prohibition itself. The profit margins on marijuana are 5 or 6 to 1 because of marijuana prohibition. And the whole notion, one thing I imagine that the Chief and I would agree on, is that it's very important to decrease the access that young people have to marijuana. I would argue that marijuana prohibition is responsible for the widespread access that young people have to marijuana today, because prohibition acts as it creates chaos in the state. It's the abdication of control and authority to the underground economy and to violent cartels that have no interest in the health of young people. And just one other quick thought, which is that middle and high schoolers in California consistently say that marijuana is easier for them to access than alcohol, and that they are more likely to smoke it than cigarettes.
Right. Well, let's take a look at some statistics that we found involving young people. More than 83% of teens say marijuana is fairly easy to get. Teens under 17 who smoke marijuana are 3 times as likely to abuse cocaine or other stimulants, and teens under 17 who smoke marijuana are 3 times as likely to have suicidal thoughts. And Chief, you were saying those are some of the offshoots of legalizing a drug that young people might have greater access to.
Well, I think it's just very clear, and the idea that because it's available, it's used more frequently. I think we owe it to our kids to be clear on a topic like this, to our young people especially. You don't need these substances in your life. Smoking is bad for you. Marijuana is bad for you. It's not something that's going to enhance your education. It's not going to enhance your ability to be employed, legal or not. And I guess we need to advocate to our kids, like we do with alcohol, that you need to stay away from this stuff. It's not good for you. The idea that by legalizing it or somehow decriminalizing it is going to solve the problem would fly in the face of what this country experienced with opiates in the 1880s. It flies in the face of the opium wars in China. We know what happens when it becomes unrestricted, and the idea that somehow kids, if it were now legalized and regulated, are not going to abuse it. We now see kids using marijuana at such a level that the treatment for dependency on marijuana is more frequent than alcohol.
But it directly parallels our success in lowering teen use in cigarettes. I mean, that is a fine model where the use of cigarettes across the entire population, but particularly focused on young people, was treated as a public health issue, not as a criminal justice issue. We did massive amounts of education and have substantially addressed use to the extent that marijuana, which is an underground drug, is far more widely used and available to teens.
Well,
those of us who are interested in lowering teen access to marijuana need to seriously look at regulating it and the role that only the state government and the federal government eventually will play in lowering that access.
But certainly when you legalize marijuana, when anybody who's 21 would have access to it, I mean, it flies in the face of common sense. I mean, how would you think, okay, well, if anybody over 21 has access to it, certainly teenagers would have more access to it simply by having it.
I realize that it may seem counterintuitive, but think about our experience with alcohol and with cigarettes. And obviously teens have access to those too, but it is much harder for teens today to buy cigarettes than it is for them to buy marijuana. Why? Because drug dealers don't ask for ID. But a well-regulated, licensed business does. And what Tom Amiano and others who are interested in ending marijuana prohibition in California are looking to do is to create a scheme that regulates marijuana as we do alcohol and potentially as we do cigarettes, and making it less widely available by taking both the profits and the control out of the hands of criminal syndicates.
Chief, for many years you've taken the opposite view. Putting a lid on this is the best way to do it.
There's just no way the folks who are involved in the illegal production of drugs and distribution to our children are going to stop doing that simply because we've legalized the substance. This is a just a red herring discussion on what's going to happen if we were to legalize it. There's certain things that we need to stand up and say they're not good for our society, they're not good for our kids. This idea that somehow by saying, well, gosh, we've just somehow lost this and we just now need to regulate it, it goes in the whole harm reduction strategy, which I recognize is a view that's held by Drug Policy Alliance. I don't believe that's best for our society, and I don't believe it serves our children well. The message should be this is bad for you, just like cigarettes and alcohol, and stay away from it. Not only that, it's illegal.
We could not do a worse job than we're doing right now in keeping young people away. Marijuana is far more popular today than when it passed overwhelmingly by the voters in 1996. And one thing about the polling on legalizing marijuana across California is that when you talk about legalizing marijuana in order to generate desperately needed new revenue for the state of California, that's actually not the most popular reason that people want marijuana to be legalized. They generally recognize that the harms associated with marijuana are low enough that this is a waste of criminal justice resources and that they feel that they should be redirected.
Chief, how do you feel about that? I mean, you could make the argument that voters don't know all the facts, or not as intimately involved with it as you are on a day-to-day basis.
Well, I think, Ronnie, the information has not been well shared, and there is kind of a bias in the way the information has come out. I believe we're just at the very beginning of understanding the long-term consequences of extended marijuana use, and I think ultimately we're going to see it's a very harmful substance for a number of reasons. But that said, I think it's so critical that we really have a meaningful understanding of what would the effects be. There's no doubt that increasing the use of a psychoactive substance like marijuana are going to have very real costs in society, much like alcohol does. And the taxing of alcohol doesn't even come close to covering the costs of alcohol expenses.
Well, we've gone to the internet and just looked up some blogs of people, regular users of marijuana, and we'll see what they have to say. Here's a couple of quotes that we found. I was a lot lazier. Took away my drive to do certain things. The fear of social interaction and paranoia was increased. Damaged ability to relate to others. And these are admitted daily marijuana users, and just sort of an unbiased view of how they thought it affected them. And when you talk about long-term social consequences for a society.
But most people, of course, are not daily users. Forgive the interruption. Most people who use marijuana, and of course it is the most widely used drug in the Western world. It's 40 years since it became a widely used recreational drug, and so you would think that we would know by now the kind of health harms that Chief Wasden is referring to would have surfaced by now, and they haven't. Most people who use marijuana use it in absolute moderation, the way they do alcohol. There's a tiny percentage of people who have dependency issues. The vast majority of people use it responsibly.
And I guess the fear is that however small the percentage is, will that percentage grow?
Absolutely.
I think it's just really clear that as you legalize or decriminalize a substance, there will be more use. And the idea that we will somehow leapfrog past that and everybody will use it in moderation is I don't think, valid. And I think that it's not a substance we need. It's not good for our youth or for people in their lives. It's a psychoactive, addictive, or dependency-developing substance that people are better off not having in their lives, especially our young people.
There's no making marijuana go away. It's the nation's number one cash crop.
Well, I was going to mention, it was tried with prohibition, and eventually, the powers that be said, you know what, adults should make the determination of what they use and how much they use.
Real big difference between prohibition and marijuana. The big difference is that alcohol was a part of our society, and then prohibition was attempted. I see the studies, I see the information that's coming out, but I think it's inaccurately portrayed. I think our education to our community has not been fair and unbiased, and I don't think they understand the facts.
Marijuana was prohibited in 1937 when most Americans had no idea what it was. Marijuana has become popular on its own. Drugs come and go.
The merits of medical marijuana have been used to foist the idea that marijuana is this harmless substance that can help people in their lives. I think the medical industry is going to develop the cannabinoid medications and remove the claim of medical marijuana over the next few years. And then we'll have the discussion strictly on a psychoactive substance used recreationally in our society, something we don't need.
We'll continue this when we come back. And before we go to break, a reminder that Fox 40's In Focus is here to address your views and concerns. So be sure to send us any topics that you'd like to see on the show. Just log on to fox40.com and click on to the In Focus icon on the home page. We'll be right back.
You're watching Fox 40 In Focus.
Welcome back to our discussion on the pros and cons of legalizing marijuana. Just a few seconds left. Do you think that this will realistically go through, or there's still many reservations?
There is an enormous amount of momentum now because increasingly people realize that the harms associated with marijuana prohibition far outweigh the harms associated with marijuana use itself. And those harms range from the mass incarceration of nonviolent marijuana offenders by the tens of thousands, including many, many young people who are cut off from education and job opportunities and have criminal records for the rest of their lives. It's an enormous waste of criminal justice resources.